So I have a question for you. As you're writing these stories about these, bringing people to life and looking at them as whole people, how do you okay, words. How can I phrase this? So I kind of struggle when people put modern labels on people who
Mhm.
wouldn't have understood it, right? So saying things like Anne Boleyn was a feminist, that gets me because I don't know that she would have that didn't mean
Sure.
anything to her, right? So I guess I wonder, like, how do you walk that line between bringing people to life in a way
Mhm.
that we can understand, but also in a way that's fair to what they would have understood?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does make sense. And I know that I have received pushback from describing Jane Boleyn as having PTSD.
Okay.
Um, and so I do understand that. Like I do get that because obviously like at the time they would have had no concept of that. But just because they didn't have a concept of it in the way that we see it, it doesn't mean that it didn't actually exist.
Right.
Like PTSD is like has happened for centuries and centuries. We have a name for it. They did not have a name for it.
Hmm.
And so I think that we can say we can say that like okay, so I see these hallmarks are very much in common with what we would diagnose as this,
Hmm.
nowadays. Because think about it, like PTSD is a very, very modern concept. Like, and it came about after the Vietnam War. But if you talk about people like in World War I and World War II, and you read some of their experiences, like they were very obviously suffering from it. They just
Hmm.
didn't have a name for it. So I think that we have to be very careful in saying that like we if we're going to say that, first of all, we need to make sure we have evidence to back up what we are saying
Hmm.
because we can't just go around like diagnosing people with mental illnesses, and we can't, like, it's very irresponsible. And you
And
know
from
um
not only is it like diagnosing, and I'm not referring to you in particular, but just diagnosing somebody that we don't know to start with, but then diagnosing someone from 500 years away is also like based on not a lot of writing and stuff. It's just kind of like, that seems
exactly,
fair.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if we are going to do that, we have to make sure that we can back that up and say like this is why I think that. um but like, and the same thing with like feminists, like that. Yeah, Anne Boleyn, I would not say she was a feminist. I would say that she was very progressive in many of her beliefs about women. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that because my next big project that I'm working on is about George Boleyn and him having feminist literature and what that meant.
Did he have
And
Christine de
so,
Pizan or something like that?
yep. Yeah,
Okay.
well, based on Christine de Pizan,
Okay.
yes. And I have a theory that I'm working on, and I'm actually going to trace the provenance of one of his books. Um, yeah, because I have a whole thing about it. But I totally understand what you're saying, and yeah, we do have to be careful not to put our mindset on them as well. But uh, I think, they are much closer to us than we think that they are.
Mm.
We think 500 years is like a huge gap of time. But if you think about it, in the whole of time, really 500 years was not that long ago. And
Yeah.
human behavior tends to be the same. If it's not exactly the same, it definitely rhymes. And so I think that it is okay to put some of those labels on there, but I think that they have to come with an addendum of saying that, in their time, that was not a concept that they thought of. That was like when I was writing about Jane and trying to put into words what she was experiencing, what I could read in her testimony and in the historical records, I could say, oh yeah, I see that this, and this is how I make my assumption. But she's not aware of that.
Right.
So I had her really kind of struggling with understanding what was going on inside her head and why she was having intrusive thoughts. And, we name them. We have a name for them. She didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think when you do it in fiction, it's much, much harder because you really have to show. You have to show and you cannot tell.
Mhm.
And I think that is probably the guiding force that I follow when doing that stuff, when looking through things from a modern lens, is how would this person tell me? How would they describe it to me?
Mhm. Mm.
And I think that's where we can draw that line because, we are the historian and it is our job to analyze. And of
Mhm.
course, we're going to analyze from our own experience. But
Yeah.
I think if we are going to do that, we have to be very careful that, especially like when we're writing and we're talking about people, is that we are doing it as if they are saying it to us. They are describing to us what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And then that gives us a more authentic expression of how they would have done those things.
Mhm.
I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it was more, I don't know, it was just a discussion, I guess. Because
Yeah.
I think it's something that it's hard to struggle with that when people write historical fiction because you want to make it relatable
Yeah.
to people
Right.
today. But then at the same time, how do you avoid
Yeah.
putting these concepts in to their life that, and, I also
Right.
wonder sometimes there's the whole idea that sometimes things like once you have a name for something, then it becomes more of a thing,
Yeah.
like, and
Like
so,
everybody's a narcissist right now.
right, exactly. Right. And so, yeah, I saw somebody diagnosed
Yeah.
Henry VIII as a narcissist, and it's like, I don't know, real like, aren't we all? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. And and so
Right.
it's hard to walk that line between making them somebody that in today's
Yeah.
terms, sure, we would call Henry VIII the
Yeah.
narcissist. He was
Yeah.
also an all-powerful king that was ordained by God and
Yeah.
like needed a son. And I don't know,
Mhm.
like people did some crazy stuff, but I don't know that you can.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And but like putting these
Yeah.
labels, and somebody I saw in a group one time, so why I'm not on social media anymore, really. Somebody said
Yeah.
Anne Boleyn, or it was like a Pride Month thing, and they're like, Happy Pride. They made a poster of Anne Boleyn celebrating Pride. They're like, because she would have been so supportive of the whole movement. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
do we know that?
No. Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
maybe not. She was pretty progressive for the time, but I don't like I wouldn't like it
Yeah.
if 500 years from now somebody was coming back and putting labels
Yeah.
on me that I didn't know anything about. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
oh. Okay. But
Well, like that kind of comes from like Retha Warnicki, right? So, because
yeah,
Retha Warnicki, she basically stated, that there was this, like gay culture around Anne,
that's
and that's
right.
why
Yeah.
that's why all these men were like executed because they
Yeah.
were all in relationships with
Right.
each other, and obviously like there's no evidence of that. I mean, maybe they were, but like there's no evidence for that. In fact, there's quite evidence for quite the opposite.
Yeah.
But of course, like that is something that's kind of stuck, and so they kind of think of her as like having this culture around her, and
Yeah.
that's just not it's just not the case. It and it so it is. Yeah. I mean, it's a really hard thing to walk because obviously we want to be inclusive and we want to, we also want to think the best of our heroines, right?
Right.
But let's be real. Anne was not a pleasant person a lot of the times. She
Yeah.
wasn't. She did do a lot of very, bitchy things. I
Yeah.
mean, she just did. Now, like she did them. Did she do them because she was trying to be that way? Not necessarily, right? A lot of times she did those things to survive. She did those
Mhm.
things because she had to, because it was expected to. But at the same time, she was a human and she wasn't perfect. And she didn't, she didn't support all of the things that we support. She didn't
Right.
include all of the people that we include. In fact, if anything, Anne was exclusive,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know so it's, yeah, it is a very fine line to walk, and I do understand, I totally see how you're saying. And especially in fiction, they always want to make Anne as like this very plucky heroine, right? It's always a woman, and she's always very plucky and rebellious and real,
Right.
and here is where, like, my response to that was, I very intentionally wrote Catherine to be the opposite of that.
Hmm.
In Corrado, Catherine plays by the rules. She
Hmm.
does what is expected to her of her. She is literally the epitome of the Tudor woman, right?
Yeah.
Because that's who she would have been. She was
Yeah.
not a plucky heroine. She wasn't, and so we need it. That's a trope we need to kind of get away, because in essence we're taking away their agency,
Yeah.
right?
That's
We're
the thing.
taking, yeah.
We're
And
putting all this stuff
so,
on them and not giving them a chance to just speak themselves.
right,
Yeah. It
right.
sounds like you've thought a lot about how to make them do that.